Hello and welcome. This class is dedicated by Mark and Rebecca Belinsky in honor of a memory of his mother Asya Bas Ben Sion, first yahrzeit on the 18th of Sivan. And the class title is How to Find Your Own Voice. Raising the flames to rise on their own. And it's based on this week's Torah chapter, which begins Ba'aleshcha Saneres, a command to the high priest Aaron, and to all the priests afterwards, the high priest that would kindle and ignite the menorah, which is the candelabra in the temple. And the word used is a very unique word, the only place used in the entire Torah. The word is Ba'aleshcha. So immediately the Medrash and Rashi and the commentaries all jump on that word. Why does the Torah change? Ba'aleshcha in Hebrew means, from the word halah, to raise flames. When the general word is, we say hadlakas haneros, which is to kindle flames, to ignite flames, to light them, which in Hebrew would have been bahadlakoscha, not ba'aleshcha. Why this change? And the answer given by Rashi is because the mitzvah was that you shouldn't just kindle the flames, but you should also make sure that they rise on their own. So when you ever light a flame, you notice that it takes a split second for the flame to catch, and if you move too quickly, it can burn out. So here the command was the change of word in the scripture in the verse is in order to emphasize: do not light the next candle until you see this flame rising on its own. Wait that split second or that moment until you see the flame is burning on its own. And that's why the Torah changed it. But that only carries over the question to why is that so important? What's the big thing? You light the flames. If one of them burns out, you come back and you relight it. Like we all do. It's not... and since the Torah is precise and every word is precise, here you'll see in one word lies the secret of many challenges and life's issues and challenges that we face is all answered with this one shift, with this one change of a word, which is very common. You study Torah, you come to realize how a word, just using it the right way, can really change the whole way you look at something, which is true in general. Anyone that's a writer or a speaker knows that words, you could say the same thing with words that will not resonate, and then you could say it with the right words and it resonates. So words are much more than just labels and symbols. It's not just symbolic. It actually captures the right word at the right moment will capture the spirit more than just a descriptive element, especially if you're familiar with the language of Hebrew. So Hebrew is very different than most of the Latin languages, all the Latin languages actually, in the sense that there are two types of languages. There are descriptive languages, which is most Latin languages like English, French, Spanish, and so on. Then there are metaphorical language. Hebrew is a metaphorical language. What I mean by that is that the words don't just describe something, they each have a lot of layers of meaning and actually describe also the personality and the function of the object. When we say, for example, the word table, even though it has some Latin or Greek word, some root in the Latin or Greek that may have some significance, but for us it's just symbolic. If we were taught that this is called a chair, it'd be a chair. In Hebrew, the words themselves, every word, it captures the soul, so to speak, and the essential nature of the object. And that's why actually in actual writing, one word in Hebrew, or one sentence in Hebrew can take a paragraph in English and 3 paragraphs in French, those familiar with the languages. So Hebrew is extremely unique in that sense. You can study the words, the roots of the words, the etymology and so on, and you find fascinating interpretations. That's just the word itself. If you add the gematria, that every Hebrew letter has a equivalent number. Aleph is 1, Beis is 2. And then you add also the different permutations of how words are structured. So Hebrew is itself a very cryptic and very powerful and very mysterious language and many layered language. So when you know that, then the word Ba'aleshcha, as you'll see, one word can actually change can be the difference between life and death, can be the difference between night and day. As we shall soon see, the difference between raising flames and lighting flames. most people would say, what really is the difference? Raising flames, the flames are rising. But this rising on its own that I began with, it carries within it a fundamental principle in education, in relationships, in communication, between people, friends, and so on. I already said communication. I just meant different levels of communication. And frankly, almost in every area of life, you'll see there's a very big difference between igniting something or lighting something, kindling something, and raising it. So let's start with on a very basic level, and that is in education itself. When we educate children or students of any level, there's really two methods, two ways to educate in general terms. One is you teach people information. You teach a student information, every student according to the stage of the child's development. In early stages, obviously, it's basic information, then more complex information. So it's really the transfer of data from books, from journals, from educational manuals, and from a teacher, teaching a beginner or advanced student information. And you gather this body of information. That's why school somewhat required writing, homework, research, because you really have to gather. To be a doctor, you need to have a serious body of medical knowledge. Same with a lawyer, same with an accountant, same with any given area of sciences that you need to simply have knowledge. That knowledge you cannot just intuit, you can't guess it, you need to master it, and therefore you need to read it from books that came before us, and so on. So before a person becomes, whether it's a doctor or any form of doctor, a master, they first have to read everything that was said till now. And then you could say, once you have the experience and you've developed credentials and you have peer approval, yes, you could find new interpretations, new applications, and so on. But it's first based on really mastering an enormous amount of data and information. This is true in any school of thought, anything that we teach, whatever subject it may be. Then there's teaching methodology. Methodology is very different than teaching information. What's methodology? Methodology is to teach a student how to think, how to solve a problem, a method, how to think logically, how to build a case, how to look at differing opinions, and this is far more complicated. There are many masterful teachers that can teach a lot of information because they know a lot of information, but to teach method requires a far deeper understanding of the subject matter, because you're no longer just teaching information and reading and memorize 1,000 pages or memorize 10,000 laws and rules and so on. It's methodology, and methodology is how to think. And there are many people who are masters of knowledge, but they don't necessarily know how to think, how to solve problems. So you have what I think. Oscar Wilde said that there are people who know the price of everything, but the value of nothing. So that people they give you any data and any information, but they really know nothing. You push them a little beyond their comfort zone and try to get them to be a little imagination, a little creative. They only know the facts. And because they were not trained to know how to think. Now the difference is very, very stark, very significant difference. The first approach, you may be a master of a lot of information, but should your teacher not be there, should you not have a manual, and should something come your way that is outside of the scope of the information you've gathered through your life, you may not know what to do. Whereas in the second approach, once you've mastered the method, see, even when your teacher is not there to ask, and you have no book to look to, but you know the way of thinking, you have the methodology, so you can solve problems that are outside of the scope of the knowledge that was given to you. You can derive things from other parts of knowledge. Now, obviously, in the latter approach doesn't mean there's no transfer of data, but it's a very different focus. And when it comes to really great teachers in history, if you've ever had one, you'd know the difference. One who becomes a mentor, and really you can say changed your life. It gave you a way to think, how to look at things a certain way, a perspective, vision, and empowers. That's far rarer. You'll find many people who say, I have a good teacher, they taught me well, they know how to explain things, and I learned much. But the latter is a far more rare specimen of someone that teaches methodology, because then it's about teaching you to stand on your own feet. And that's the difference between raising flames and kindling flames. Everyone is capable of being a flame, because as the book in Proverbs says, the flame of God is the soul of the human being. Ner Hashem nishmas adam. So we all have, the soul by definition is like a flame. It's the closest approximation to a soul is a flame. What's a flame? A flame flickers. It's restless. It's always transcendent. It's always rising. And it defies gravity, as opposed to the wick, which would be a metaphor for the body. So we all have within ourselves a flame from the moment we're born. Now, through education process, you could have someone who ignites your flame. In a sense, ignites you, gives you information, so now you're burning. But can you rise on your own? Or you're dependent on the one that is giving you that has ignited you. That's the difference. Did the teacher teach you to be an individual, independent individual? Or are you still dependent in some way, psychologically or in other ways, on the teacher? So of course in early stages of any education, whether it's parenting or it's a proper education, of course we're dependent on those that provide for us, whether it's information or sustenance or a shelter or love and nurturing. But what's the ultimate goal? The ultimate goal is to create an independent flame that rises on its own. So then when you think of it that way, that change of word is not just a little nuance. It happens to be the difference between an independent adult or an adult that remains fearful and afraid of really finding their own voice. And hence the topic, how to find your own voice. And that's a very big difference, you know. So you have to ask yourself a few key questions if you want to really honestly appraise yourself. And it's not easy questions to answer because some of them are painful. The question is, do you have your own voice? Do you even know what it is? How do you know, for example, how many decisions you make are based not on you, but based on what was expected of you? What is expected of you? What other people want? Pleasing them. How much of our personality and our attitudes are based on attitudes that we picked up in our early impressionable years from those that were our authorities, our parents, our educators, our peers. And even today, you know, society itself has its unspoken rules to fit in. So you have to ask yourself the question, when you speak up, when you live your life, when you make decisions, where is it coming from? Is it your flame rising on its own, or is it someone else's flame that's just been imparted to you? Now, this could be very theoretical. You should just sit back and philosophically ponder on the idea. But when you start looking, especially in the area of relationships, of building your own relationships, love, in places where we're vulnerable, that's when you'll start seeing these issues come up very, very powerfully. Very few people are going to tell you that their lives are filled with fear and insecurity and they second-guess themselves. Because it's very difficult to acknowledge that. You know, nobody likes to feel that they're that way. But I can tell you, most people on earth are that way. You know, whether they're aware of it or not aware is another story, but most people are. Because we pick up these fears from the people around us when we're children, whether they say it or not, but we pick it up from the vibes. And what it really ends up happening is, as we grow older, we start losing confidence in ourselves, or we never really build confidence in ourselves. So how often do you have a situation where you're faced with an important decision and you cannot come to a conclusion, a commitment, what they call fear of commitment? Yes, sometimes the reason that you're not is because there's a good logical reason, but how often is it not based on logic, but based on your own fears? And if you're a smart person, you have a lot of smoke screens to cover your tracks, so no one can really tell that it's coming from fear. Very often, when you see people who have a chronic problem like that, you can trace it back to their childhood. And almost, I can't say it's textbook in the sense because everybody's different, but very often the first question you have to ask when you start lining up the usual suspects is, were you criticized as a child by your parents? When you came home from school and they asked you something, or you stated your opinion, what was the attitude? Did the parents embrace you and compliment you for your way of doing things? Or did they always criticize you and always say, no, you're stupid, you're wrong? Did they silence you? Now, I'm using extremes here. Silencing can be in many forms of it. You can have people who just their father every time would almost like be indifferent. A child got some type of prize, the father would just simply, like almost shrug with his shoulders. These things have profound impact on a child because they look to adults for validation. They look, am I doing the right thing? like anyone who's in a state where they're growing and they're developing. So you look around you for those that you respect to see, do they acknowledge, am I going in the right direction? And you want to nod, or even if there is something to be corrected, there's ways to do it in healthy ways, and there are ways to do it in demoralizing ways. So how many demoralized children are there on earth? There are, I think, 1.7 billion children on earth. How many percentage do you think are demoralized? Well, all you got to do is look at how they turn into adults. If they have these issues as adults, rest assured it came from somewhere. Because you see, when a child enters this world, they have no reason to be insecure. They have no reason to be afraid. They have no reason to second guess themselves. Yes, a child doesn't yet have the knowledge, the experience, how to make decisions and so on. But should the child just be validated and nurtured and loved, that child will become confident and secure in its approaches, including sometimes you make a mistake. I mean, we all know, for example, even in employer-employee relations, in the training of individuals, if you really want people to excel, any good manager knows that they have to also allow people to make a mistake. It's the only way you can learn to walk on your own feet. Talk about rising on your own. Imagine a mother and father have such compassion for a child. The child is crawling and they see the child is about to take a step, and because the child slips, they immediately grab the child. And they will never let their child fall. Would that be an act of compassion or a criminal act? Criminal act, of course, because there's no way you can walk without falling first, once, twice. But you show the child, I'm there for you. You walk toward me, and I'll hold you up in case. But never to stop them or clip their wings, to not allow them to spread their wings, which always includes making a mistake or falling once, twice, 3 times till you learn. Now, you see, you have to have the balance. Some parents overdo it where they completely don't show any support and they just grow on your own. You need both. That's what you need. You'll see this in the animal kingdom everywhere. You need an element of nurturing and validation, but also showing the child that you respect and honor their choices. And especially as children grow into adults, mistakes are made. And for parents, it's very hard to see a child make a mistake that you know they're going to be making a mistake. Now, obviously, if it's a dangerous situation and it's really life and death, it's one thing. Even then, you got to be careful how to not undermine a person's autonomy. However, in most situations, it's a matter of just have restraint, an active restraint to allow a person to rise on their own. And the people who invest that way always see the dividends. You always see the children that grow up and actually bring nachas and joy because they've learned to figure it out. This is teaching methodology, much more than teaching an answer. So a good parent, a good educator will say when an adult child or someone that's already advanced student, or I'm not talking about a newborn, comes and says, can you help me with an answer to a question? That would be the easy way to give you the answer. I'll tell you something better. I won't give you the answer, but I'll give you the ways how to find the answer, which is a greater gift. Now the shortcut, of course, I want the answer and stop, I have other things to do. We'd all like to right away immediately get the answer. However, the true perpetual gift is you give someone the tools. Here's the tool chest, here's the ways. So when you have other questions, and I'm not there, you'll always have a way to find the answers. And you build the confidence that you can find answers, you can find the direction and guidance in any given situation. So one word that's changed in the name of the chapter, Ba'aleischa, in this week's Torah portion, one word, from Ba'adlakeischa to Ba'aleischa, instead of kindling, instead of igniting, raising the flames, that changes the entire perspective. And that's why it was so important. As I said earlier, what's the big thing? So the flame will burn out. You'll go back and ignite it. Because the critical thing is for a sensitive parent, a sensitive teacher. And here, our Aaron, the high priest, is a symbol for all mashpiyim, so to speak, for anyone that has an effect on another person. This is not only teacher, student, or parent and child, but also friends. Anyone you may inspire. You can inspire someone. Inspiration relatively is an easy thing, but maintenance and maintaining the inspiration is a far harder thing. Maintenance contracts are always more expensive than the initial consultation, because maintaining things means that you have tools to keep it going. And we all know you can get inspired and it's very easy for it to dissipate. The maintaining means that you learn the tools and the methods for it to perpetuate in your life, You're no longer dependent. You've become an individual, an independent individual that has all that you need to rise on your own. And that was the key. That God says to Moses to tell Aaron, never suffice with just kindling or igniting. You have to always make sure that the one that's receiving should be able to be a giver too, not just a taker. Because it's easy to teach people things and they always remain in a perpetual state of receiving. But to teach a student to become a teacher, then you know there's something eternal about it. The Talmud says that a third generation indicates on perpetuity, that there's a eternal future. Because when a parent has a child, okay, that's one thing. When a teacher has a student, but when your student becomes a teacher and the next generation, then you know it has the power to perpetuate forever, because you didn't just teach someone to receive, you taught someone to teach. And that's the word Ba'alei Yisrael, entirely different meaning than just kindling. So one word. But then, of course, broadening the theme comes down to, okay, fine. We grew up in a world where many of us have developed insecurities and fears from our parents, from society, from our educators, and from all different types of forces around us. And now, yes, it's difficult to know, as I go back to the question I asked earlier, do you have your own unique voice? Do you have your own unique voice? And do you even know what it is? And not an easy question to answer, because anything you answer may still be clouded by your upbringing. Your answers are not necessarily the answer that's really coming from within you. It could be this is what you've been trained to say, programmed, and maybe your voice never found its expression in the fullest sense of the word. I know it's not exactly a very appealing thing to hear, but the only way to get to know whether it's the case is to ask the question. So we have to sometimes ask uncomfortable questions to ourselves. And listen, none of us are objective, but even if you're subjective, you can be completely subjective, or at least you could acknowledge you're subjective. The Baal Shem Tov says there's two types of subjectivity. Or his words is there's two types of concealment. There's a verse in the book of Deuteronomy that says, "V'anechi haster aster es ponai b'yemahu." And that day I will conceal my face. Double concealment. So the Baal Shem Tov, who's the founder of the Hasidic movement almost 300 years ago, asked the question, what is the double concealment? Should have said, I conceal my face. He says, because there's a concealment where you know something is concealed. But then there's a concealment that the concealment conceals the fact that something is concealed. You don't even know there's something concealed. You can convince yourself everything is cool. You got it all clear. Today they call it denial. But a very profound level of denial is you don't even know you're in denial. Some people may know somewhat and they acknowledge it or they don't acknowledge it, depending on their level of pride. But sometimes you really don't even know you're in the dark. You convince yourself, as it says in another verse in one of the prophets, Samim cheshach le'er. You think that darkness is light, and light is darkness. Then, of course, if you have a compounded problem, not just quantitatively, but qualitatively, because how do you get out of a situation you don't even think you need to get out of it? Which is why in many of the healing circles you'll say that you have to hit rock bottom. A person who's in that state of denial, doesn't even know there's a problem, there's nothing that can shake them up unless they really hit rock bottom, they realize that they're desperate. Without that, how could you illuminate someone who doesn't even think they need illumination? They'll dismiss anything you say. Now, all of us probably have a measure of that in certain areas of our lives. The question is how much it impacts our lives, and the question what areas. If it comes to relationships, which of course is usually the Achilles heel of all our lives, relationships, because it exposes our vulnerabilities, our strengths and our weaknesses. We can get by walking down the street. Most people can get by without letting on all these issues. But when you get to a relationship, it's not so simple. There's another person. And there's a thing called love. And there's a thing called pain. There's a thing called expectations. And all that comes pouring out. So if a person is dealing with real blind spots, to the point they don't even know that they have blind, or they don't even know what their blind spots are, or they even know whether they have blind spots, in relationships it always comes out in a very amplified form and fashion. I hope no one of you have ever experienced it. But because there, you can run, but you can't hide, so to speak. And as a result, many relationships suffer from this because a person who doesn't even know there's a problem will never acknowledge a problem. You have two people, let's say a couple, and they go for counseling, and each one acknowledges, here's some issues I have, here, this issues. Fine, you may not see them all. Some of them seem worse, you see the other person is worse than you are, whatever it is. But at least people come, no one's forcing. What happens if a person says, I don't have any problem, I don't know what the problem is? And the spouse tells you, there's a lot of problems. What do you do then? The person is actually convinced there's no problems, or at least not problems with them, the problem is with someone else. Now, if you throw in modern terms like narcissism, or compulsive narcissism, chronic narcissism, there's a lot of levels of narcissists, then you get yourself in a situation that's almost impossible to pierce, because there's no narcissist that ever will go around with a sign saying, I'm a narcissist. You have sex addicts, drug addicts, alcoholics, other addictions that people will say at some point, yes, I am an alcoholic, I'm abusing a substance, or whatever it may be. A narcissist will never say, I'm a narcissist. It's a contradiction of terms, because narcissism never thinks you're a narcissist. That's the whole meaning of narcissism. You always think someone else is the problem, never yourself. But anyway, the topic tonight is not narcissism, I'm just throwing it into the whole picture. So now, with all that, all the above, and we have all these subjective parts of our personality, how can you figure out what your voice is? Do you have a voice? So there are ways to do that, and one of the ways is to be able to go back to your own childhood. Just ask yourself a question. Do you remember having a happy childhood or not such a happy childhood? Obviously, I don't want to speak in broad strokes to just say happy, so most people will say some of it was happy, sometimes it wasn't so happy. But often, some people will say it was primarily not so happy, or it was overall happy, and I don't really remember don't underestimate the answer to this question. Because someone who answers, I don't recall much happiness in my childhood, that means, without even having to be a prophet, that means the environment you grew up in was not a happy one. It means basically you had parents, mother or father, or one or the other, that complained a lot. And at home, everything is exposed, nobody's hiding, nobody's on their best behavior, and children absorb it all. They absorb the bad moods, they absorb the impulsive behavior, they observe all the flaws of our parents' behavior. And whether the parents are abusive or not is not relevant to this particular matter. It's relevant, but not to this, because a parent doesn't have to be abusive for children to absorb parental attitudes. Insecure parents, basically more or less an insecure environment. Very hard to change that. Unless parents are working on it and changing their attitudes and actually working on themselves. But you can't just, someone that's angry, anger is a vibe. You don't have to always express anger to be angry. And there's anger in a person's life, children who are very sensitive, their antennae are very, very sensitive because they're impressionable. One analogy given for it, think of it like the psyche of a child of being like a warm ball of wax, where every experience is etched in that wax, and as the wax hardens, that experience hardens with it. That's all of us. We all began as children. So nobody is immune to the influences in that environment. And that environment will mostly, in most cases, indicate what kind of adult you'll grow up into becoming. Now, this doesn't mean all is lost, and doesn't mean that we can't change things. But to get beyond the denial level and be able to look at ourselves a little more honestly, you have to first find out what kind of childhood you had. Now, this doesn't mean we have to travel back and regress into every experience that we had as children. That's not what I'm suggesting at all. It's just a general way of trying to assess your life. Very often you ask anyone that comes for, let's say, marriage counseling or relationship issues and so on, one of the basic questions to ask sensitively is, how was the relationship of your parents? And many will say they were very loving, or they'll say no, they were always fighting, it was not a good relationship. There's no such thing as being immune to that. Every child felt that. That doesn't mean, once you know it, remember, awareness of it is half the cure. The expression, Yediyas hamach lechetzi refuah. Why it's so important to know this is because we're trying to get beyond the haster aster that I described, the double concealment. So the first thing is to figure out, is there something here? Is there something beneath the surface I don't see? And that's not meant to bring up pain, it's meant to be aware. and therefore be sensitive to. And if a person says, no, it doesn't matter whether my parents had a good relationship or not, I can figure it out. That's a very cocky attitude that usually is coming from a person who's both immature and probably insecure. No one can figure it all out. First of all, we all need help. And second of all, especially when it comes to relationships and it comes to effects from our childhood, you can just say, it's all figured out, Anyone that says that is basically has a lot of pain probably, and they can't really acknowledge it. And I'm not trying to be insensitive in bringing it up. I'm just saying, here we're talking, I'm not, all of you are pretty intact. I'm talking to people out there that may not be so. So it's always a good way to present it. Like the guy that came to one of the Rebbes, and he says, I have a friend that did a really terrible thing, and he's ashamed to come to you, so he sent me as a shliach, as a messenger, to find out what he can do about this problem that he has. And the Rebbe said to him, why did he have to expose himself to you and be embarrassed to you? He should have come to me and say, I have a friend. Which of course was the situation. It was the guy. He just, it was a way of, I have a friend. So that's always a good way in case you sometimes want to broach the subject and you don't want to say it's you. You say, I have a friend. Those that will read into it, they'll read into it. But, maybe that already spoils it by exposing that method, but so be it. But in truth, on a serious note, when I speak about these subjects, I speak to myself just as I speak to you. We're all in the same boat. We're all human beings. We all have our blind spots and our subjectivity. The question is, what you're going to do about it. And very often, when you do have fear and insecurity, and you're criticized a lot, it's very hard to acknowledge that you have a flaw, because flaws were seen as fatal. Parents who don't know how to deal with a child and criticize a lot. So every time you had a flaw, that was like a real liability. So you learn to basically gloss over and say, no, I'm fine, no problem. People are suffering, they're smiling on the outside, no problem, and they're inside, they're tearing apart and crying. But we learn to do that often because it wasn't allowed. You weren't allowed to cry. You weren't allowed to express your feelings. You were silenced. So you can rest assured, if you were silenced, that means your voice was silenced. Now, of course, not to paint everything in as nightmares, there's also the positive. And there are plenty of people who grew up in beautiful homes, and you'll see they'll immediately react as saying, yes, I had parents who validated me. When I did something, even if it was a small thing, there was like appreciation, there was expression, there was excitement. Because on a child's level, they paint a little picture, even though maybe they're not going to get some major award for it in the big world, but for the child, that's the whole world. So a healthy parent is going to compliment and not say, who do you think you are? You're Picasso or whatever, which unfortunately is Now, children growing up in such an environment, obviously their voice is has been validated, and they do have a voice, and their opinion, they respect themselves, and therefore they respect their opinions, and they do speak up. Now, every one of us grew up in different homes, so we all have our own story. So I'm not discussing one particular case study here, talking about all of us. So we probably all belong somewhere on the spectrum from one extreme to the next. Obviously, the worst extreme, I don't know if I described the worst extreme, but I described some bad scenarios. And there's also positive scenarios, and then there's something in between. The point of this whole exercise is not to not just to articulate or what's the word I want to say? Diagnose different scenarios, but it's rather just to give us tools of how you look at yourself. Going back to the original question, are you a flame that's rising on your own? So it's very important to establish what forces have affected you. If indeed you grew up in an environment that did not allow you to rise on your own, you may have a lot of information, you may be a master of this, a master of that, but you don't really have that inner confidence. So then you have a certain approach to take, and we'll discuss that soon. If, on the other hand, you do feel, and hopefully you're objective enough to be, or you're honest enough rather to say, something, I do think I have some of my own voice because either I had parents or environment or mentors or whatever experiences that helped me acknowledge that. A lot of people, for example, say my parents weren't the best, but I had a grandmother, and she really gave me that confidence. A lot of people, you hear that very often, a grandparent does it sometimes for someone. Then, of course, you have grandparents that do the opposite. So, I've got to paint every scenario, basically. The point is that the first thing is you have to establish where do you think you stand in regard to this. And it doesn't matter to err on the side of caution is always better, because then way you're probably going to be more honest, to understand where you stand. Do you think you found your voice? And if you have found your voice, are you expressing it? And if not, why not? You know? And how are your decisions made? Are you ready to take risks? Are you ready to do something that others may criticize, but you feel in your heart strongly about it? You know, these are real questions that come up, not necessarily every day, but in our lifetimes we're going to have some serious junctures where we're going to have to answer these type of questions. And again, everybody here and everybody listening, wherever you are, is a different point of your life, so I can't talk about one scenario, I have to talk about several. That may be relevant to some and not so relevant to others. Or maybe not relevant today, be relevant tomorrow, or yesh machal achazman, next year, whenever it may be. But decisions like this are made, career decisions, relationship decisions, where you're going to live, other decisions of that nature, and many other smaller decisions are affected by this as well. And you know, especially when it comes to a time of, let's say, crisis, God forbid, no one should ever have one, when things have to, you have to make a real decision because something, a loss in the family or some other trauma, etc. That's also when these type of, this all comes up. And that's when it becomes very necessary to be able to find your own voice. Now, of course, the saddest thing is a person lives through their entire life, and as some of the poets, I think it was, there's a poem called Voiceless, The Voiceless by, was it Shaw? I'm not sure, I forgot who. Anyway, the line is that the sad part, that people die with their music still inside them. They die with their song still inside them. Which really actually is taken from, I don't know if it's taken, whether the poet took it from there, but the concept is fundamentally Jewish, meaning Jewish, I don't mean just for Jews, I mean from Jewish sources. So it's a universal concept that every one of us has a song inside us, and more than one song. We have a certain music, and your song, your melody is unique to you, and it's not my melody, it's not someone else's. And from the moment we're conceived, from the moment that our soul enters our body, just as our souls are unique, that music and song is unique. And essentially, it's your mission in life is to sing that song, is to express it. And song, of course, doesn't mean necessarily always singing. It means expression. It means in your life, the trajectory of your life, wherever you may be, wherever you travel, who you meet, the places you will travel through, the places you'll settle in, and of course the people that you'll have relationships with are basically all a platform for you to sing your song, your voice. So in the best case scenario, your soul has that melody, that's a given. But the best case scenario, you have parents, and you have educators, and you have an environment, a community, that nurtures that. So as you begin to develop, every step of the way, you have constant validation and affirmation and encouragement to be comfortable with your own voice. So when the day comes and when you begin to go out into the larger world, you're not just going with your voice, you also have the confidence, the courage to be yourself and to make your mark in this world. I know that sounds so beautiful on paper. Unfortunately, it's not so easy. It's easier said than done because of the reasons I said before, because we don't always get a free or easy ride. You know, to another analogy, since I'm using music, I'll use another analogy, flowers. What does a gardener really do? Who tends to a beautiful garden? Doesn't create the flowers, doesn't even create the seeds. A gardener is a caretaker. You plant seeds, or the seeds fall off from a previous flower or tree or whatever, and a good gardener will do is what? Number one, make sure that the garden and the soil is cared for, tended to, watered, nurtured, fertilized. That's on the positive side. And the gardener will do a second thing as well, which is called weeding the garden, making sure that any predators, whether from the vegetable kingdom or from the animal kingdom, don't destroy this garden, especially at its tender state when things are just beginning to emerge, until they don't yet have all their protective tools. So a good gardener will do what's called asay tev and surmara in Hebrew, which is do what's right and also make sure to prevent damage being done. Which essentially in the Torah language would be positive mitzvahs and negative mitzvahs. Do this and don't do that. Direction. Good education will teach someone these are the good habits and these are the things to avoid. So parents and educators and those that are comparing them to gardeners, they don't create, they help shape. They help create the environment, I should say, even better than help shape, to make sure that everything growing grows properly. Should they not do their job, so the things may grow, but they'll be full of weeds, or there'll be other forces that overwhelm. Should they not allow, for example, let's say, should they not allow the wings to spread, or in this case, the branches to spread, so the tree or the plant or the flower will grow perhaps crooked, not be able to fully express itself and develop. So whether it's song and music or flower, all these analogies are critical because they tell you one thing. Nobody on earth gives you your life. Nobody on earth creates your flower. Nobody on earth gives you your music. Only God gave that to you. That's a God-given birthright. That means you have the flame inside of you and you can rise on your own. But at the same time, God entrusted each of us with guardians, with protectors, with gardeners to help us get to that place. Now you could ask the big question, why would God do such a cruel thing? He's already giving us music and flowers. Why put us in situations where our parents, should they not choose to be or should they not be healthy, can screw us up, to put it mildly. I don't know if that's mild, but yeah, mild relatively speaking. So the same question actually was asked by King David to God by the issue of social structure, social classes. So long before, I wrote many articles on this topic a while ago, long before Karl Marx challenged the class hierarchy of economic status of people, King David asked God the following question. The Medrash tells this. Why you are God, you created the entire world, you have all the gold and silver to spread out equally to all human beings. Why did you create the wealthy and the not so wealthy and the poor? In essence, building into society a hierarchy that has potential for abuse, for exploitation, for alienation, and so on and so forth. That's what King David challenged God. And God's answer is as good as the question, even better. So God's response to King David says to him, tells David, because man chesed ve'emes man yitzarua. If I would create everybody equal, then who would bring chesed into this world? Who would do kindness? There would be no need. We'd all be self-contained. Everyone would be self-contained. There'd be no give and take. So I created the world with diversity. Everyone has something to give and everyone has something to take. And that way there's a give and take. There's a symbiosis. You see this in all the kingdoms. Just think of how bees pollinate flowers, etc., etc. There's a constant give and take. And had I created everybody with the same amount exactly, it would not have the give and take, which essentially is telling us a very fascinating thing. If you have more of something, it's not because you are something special. It's because God entrusted you with more because He knew He trusted that you would share it because you'd understand that it's not your own. It's there to share with someone else. Whether it's financially, money, or it's wisdom, or it's experience, or any other type of expertise that you happen to have. And everyone has something that someone does not else have. Everyone has a song that is theirs, that someone else can benefit from. And everyone has a song that can benefit us. So essentially the structure of existence is based on that's your birthright. Now if every one of us knew this 100,000,000% in your heart and soul, we wouldn't have 99%. I would say we have no problems because we wouldn't have the need to be jealous. We have no need to compete. I have everything I need. And you need me as much as I need you. All the insecurities and the fears and all the things we're so desperate for approval, for status, for possessions, equity, based on, if I have that, I'll be happier. If I have that, I'll be more respected. I remember I was in London the day when Lehman Brothers closed down. Had nothing to do with it. It happened to be, it was one of these divine providence things. I spoke at Canary Wharf, which is the big business in London, one of the big business centers today, finance centers. As a New Yorker, I'm not going to get into the discussion whether it's London or New York. Too subjective, either way. So I was scheduled to speak actually for a business luncheon in Canary Wharf about wealth and spirituality and a few topics like that. And the title of my talk was, "Is Your Self-Worth Defined by Your Net Worth?" That was the title. And it was a lunch topic. As God would have it, that morning Lehman Brothers closed down. So you could imagine, instead of having 150 people, they had 400 people come to my lecture because they had no job. Where do you go? They're there. They got their whatever pink slips or whatever slip it's called. I don't know what color, but I never got one. That's why I don't know the color. What's the color of? Well, it wasn't a pink. Just the company closed down, so you weren't even fired. It was worse. I mean, you basically had nowhere to go. So there was a lunch, and it says, "Is your net worth defined by? Is your self-worth defined by your net worth?" So it was a big crowd, and it was interesting. And I talked on this topic. And obviously, many people, yes, absolutely, their self-worth is defined by their net worth, or else we wouldn't be so crazy about money. It's not just because money can buy things, it defines everything. It defines who you are, what you can do, how others see you, etc., etc. And very few are immune to that, what's called impact. But going back to the subject here, affected by all these influences, it becomes very difficult to know, as I said, who you are and your voice. That's why it's so critical to understand that your self-worth is defined not by any material possession, because your self-worth is more valuable than anything material. And the proof is a very scientific, simple one. You cannot take one thing from your material possessions with you after you pass away. So what does that say about its real value? Only while you're here on this earth it has value. Imagine one day we'll settle other planets, and you find out on a certain planet, the whole planet is covered with diamonds and gold and silver. But you know what's very rare there is dust. Here, it's the other way around. We have enough dust, but diamonds and gold are rare. Let's say you come to a world like that. What would you say? See, you suddenly realize the whole thing is a joke. It's all relative to a very narrow perception of things. And I heard recently that a man in the Lower East Side passed away, a Jewish guy. He was an old bachelor, never got married. And someone told me he never got married because he was so cheap. He didn't want to share one penny with anyone. And he amassed a fortune, never gave anything to charity. I think $1.2 billion he left his estate, and every penny went to the government because there's no heirs, no charity. He didn't give it to any organization. So the government's a great thing, so the government benefited from his... I think to myself, a guy like that, I'm sure he wasn't a stupid fellow. Like, I don't know whether some say stinginess is a disease, some say it's acquired. I don't know. That's another debate. We'll do a topic on stinginess. But you start wondering, people to the last second will fight for something that they cannot take with them. No one has mastered the art. Not the pharaohs of old, not the cryogenic freezing or other, whatever it's called. Is that how you pronounce it? People, huh? Cryogenic. Okay. Like the word cry. Okay. What did I say? Cryogenic? I don't know. Whatever. You don't really hear the word pronounced too often. And no one has mastered the art. And yet, we can be so seduced and hypnotized by the moment as if, even though logic says it has no eternity, there's no way it has eternity. It's a given. No one has ever, the wealthiest person on earth has never figured out how to take their money with them. They'd love to. I'm sure some people get buried with all their, I don't know, they take checks or they take credit cards up there, but it doesn't help. The bottom line is it doesn't help. I wrote an article a number of years ago. It was called The Power of 8 Seconds. I calculated, I tested it on myself, so it's not a scientific calculation, but I did this, that from the time you put a piece of food in your mouth until it ends up in mush in your gullet, it takes around 8 seconds. If you chew a little longer, maybe 10 seconds, 15 seconds. Now tell me how much trillions of dollar industry are based on those 8 seconds. If we were all fed through intravenously, basically everything that's called taste, wine tasting, cheese tasting, the different meats, whatever it is your favorites are, would simply disappear. Because it would simply go right into your veins, straight into your bloodstream, and that would be it. But these 8 seconds creates a whole new world. And even when we know it, it's still very powerful. I'm not trying to dismiss it. I'm just trying to point out that we, in this world, are pretty blinded by what's right in front of your nose. And that's why it's so easy for us to know we're doing something wrong and do it anyway. Because we are blinded. We're not objective creatures. And when you're tempted and you're challenged, suddenly all the logic goes aside, even though 10 minutes later you say, what did I do? And even while that, you say that I know in 10 minutes I'll say, what kind of value did it have? That's the power of the moment of temporary, impermanent things in this world. We just have to acknowledge it. It's not a matter of, it's not critique, it's just a matter. Now the Kabbalists, the Arizal explained the reasoning behind it because God concealed himself very well and made sure that even if you're a person of faith, and even if you accept and understand that God is everywhere, he concealed himself well enough for you to be able to get away with those 8 seconds or 80 seconds or 8 minutes or whatever it is that it takes for instant gratification. So don't underestimate how blind we are about this and many, many, many other things. Yet our mind does tell us that there are things that are permanent and there are things that are eternal. But they're only spiritual nature. Anything in the material world, by definition, the laws of nature dictate that matter is never forever. Now matter can turn into energy, etc., etc. But materialism as an end in itself can never be something that's forever because by definition, it's bound by time and space, and everything is subject to erosion, deterioration, aging, and death. Maybe it changes form, but everything goes through that process. There's nothing immune to that, except for one thing, your self-worth, because that's not man-made. That's why I said, that's your flower, that's your music, that's God-given. It's your birthright. And the only question is this, did the gardeners in your life care for you and allow that flower and the music to emerge and allow you to have the confidence to embrace your own voice, or did they not? But regardless, it doesn't change the reality. So depending what your answers are to the questions I mentioned before, where we stand in this regard, that defines the work you need to do. If we'll go from one extreme, you're a person who has not found your voice and you don't even know what it is, and actually, it may even terrify you of figuring it out because it causes you to have to start thinking on your own and not just your comfort zone. And some people, the known evil is better than the unknown evil. Some people, what have we got to rock the boat? I lived enough years. If you're in that situation, so you have to be very aware that no matter what happened in your childhood, even if you were not validated, and even if you were silenced, that doesn't mean your voice disappeared. It just meant it's undercover. And there are methods of how to reconnect to it, which I'll soon address in a few minutes. In the other extreme, or the other scenario is that, you do recognize you have a voice, maybe partially, maybe you haven't really found it completely, or maybe you have, you don't know what to do with it. So then there's a different approach, different strategies necessary, how to solidify and actually act on it. So this goes back to a topic that I've addressed many times, which is how do you find your personal mission statement? Now we know no business can function without a mission. So by the same logic, no person should be able to really function without a mission. And yet we see people function. Well, the question is, are they functioning or not? Or they think they're functioning. What does functioning mean? If you're breathing and walking and eating and talking and so on, doesn't mean necessarily you're functioning. It means you're biologically functioning. It doesn't mean your soul's alive. It doesn't mean your heart's alive. A lot of people say, I feel like the walking dead, like a zombie. And I don't mean that physically. They mean it spiritually, psychologically, emotionally. So finding your mission is a critical component and very much another ways of saying finding your voice. Now, how does one do that? So you may recall, if you haven't, I have a few articles on it, and I'm building a workshop out of it. So I called it an exercise called POP, P-O-P-P. It's an acronym for personality, opportunities, people, and places. So if you need to remember POP, P-O-P-P. Okay. What does it mean? It's very nice that when we emerge from our mother's womb, we came with a little box or note saying, my mission is, or God says, your mission is, should you choose to accept it, etc., to do A, B, C, D. That would have been beautiful, but that's not how it works. So part of our mission is finding our mission, which is also part of the gratifying experience because you discover it. Even though it's within you, but you have to discover it. So how do you look? How do you find your mission? How do you find your voice? Again, I'm assuming that you're looking for it already and you're ready to embrace this journey and acknowledge that maybe I have it, I don't have it, all the different forces in life that may or may have not affected. So how do you find your voice? The answer is actually like a very logical one. You look at what kind of person you are. You look at these 4 elements in your life. Because based on divine providence, based on, let's call it divine choreography, your life story, starting from your personality and your opportunities and the people you know and the places you've been to, is the story of your mission. Because why were you born with this personality and someone else with a different personality? For example, some people have a creative personality. Some are far more analytic. Some are more people, introverts, extroverts. I mean, the list goes on. Hundreds of different type of personality types. And within each personality, there's a whole bunch of variations. Why were you given that personality? And let's assume for a moment, don't get into nurture, nature discussion. Personality, it's by it's hereditary or even if it's acquired. But this is your personality type where you gravitate to. You were given that personality because your mission requires that type of personality to fulfill your mission. Sounds logical to me. That's one. Then you look at the opportunities that you were given. Each of us has different opportunities. Your opportunities are not mine. And then there are the people you know. Family, friends, colleagues, strangers that you meet. The different things, the different people. And here too, no one has exactly the same sphere of influence or the same circle of friends or network, whatever you want to call it. Rolodex, contact list, all the names. And then finally, there's the places. Some people are born in Russia, some in the United States, some in Israel, some in other countries in the world. And then where you traveled, where your family traveled, where you've been to, where you moved to. Even if you're in one place your entire life. All these are indicators, let's call them signposts. That it's God's way of winking or indicating to you what your mission is. So if you sat down and just put it down on paper, mapped it out and say, okay, here's my personality. And as I said, I'm developing a workshop. I'm actually developing even a questionnaire to help people in this. But the truth is you can do it on your own, but it's easier, obviously, with some guidance. And also good to have a mentor or a friend that's objective, that looks at it and says, yeah, it sounds right, or you're missing this, or maybe I would do it. Just simply to get the picture. So once you get a portrait, call it a profile, you'll be surprised, first of all, what you see. You'll think, you think everything's obvious. It's not so obvious, because you start seeing things emerge. You'll see a portrait emerge of your story. This doesn't mean overnight suddenly you'll know your mission, but you'll know a lot more about yourself than you think you know. So this is a way of starting to find your voice. Now you may discover that your voice has not been expressed in any of these 4 areas, even though they define your life, because you've been more or less told what to say. I don't necessarily mean it literally, but basically the influences, the pressures, and so on. Have silenced certain voices, certain opinions of yours, expressed others, so on. I mean, I deal with this almost on a daily basis in counseling and speaking to people. And so often you start, you really dig and you really, obviously you do it sensitively with cooperation, whoever you're speaking to, in a respectful way. So it's amazing sometimes what you suddenly discover, and you help someone discover, that you're basically stating an opinion that's not even yours. You just heard it so many times from your father, and he hammered your head away, it just became yours, even though you don't even agree with it. But it takes an effort. I mean, it takes time to get to that point, obviously. Because when you hear something enough times, and your father or mother tells you, no, you're wrong, this is the way it is, some point you suddenly determine that's the way it is, when it has nothing to do with reality. I was recently, just to give you one somewhat of a hellish scenario, I'm not going to go into graphic detail, but So this guy that was talking to me for a long period of time, he told me he hates the holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, all the holidays. He grew up in a secular home, so all American holidays. He hates holidays. So I said, why would you hate holidays? I right away suspicious why. Because he grew up in a very dysfunctional family, and holidays was a time when the lie was very magnified. Everybody's smiling for the pictures, families come together, and the whole thing was one big bluff. Now it took months for him to say what I just said. Because first he said, oh, the holidays were beautiful. It took a while. I said to him, oh, tell me how beautiful they were. And he couldn't come up with one beautiful memory. But that's what he was told to say. Like when he said, I'm not happy. His father said, yes, you are. Now, I know it sounds weird, but when a child hears that enough times from somebody that they're supposed to respect and love, they suddenly change their mind. Okay, I am happy. When you weren't happy. What happens is a whole new false personality and persona develops. It has nothing to do with who you are. Now, in extreme cases of abuse, this is known, sadly, as being a fact. There's out-of-body experiences where you literally develop a second personality. The personality for the public, the personality that others see. And your own real personality has gone undercover and hiding, and who knows for how long. A lot of work, psychological work, especially people who've had this disassociation in their lives due to abuse or other horrible things, is to reconnect these two personalities, to be able to communicate with each other. Almost like the adult in you trying to reassure the child in you that you can come out, it's safe now, etc., etc. But it's another discussion. I'm just pointing out how extreme your whole real voice completely disappears, and you have a whole new voice. Now, I'm not getting now into the books like Sybil and all the others that talk about real personalities, that literally people who have multiple personality disorder, etc., etc. That's extreme versions of it. I'm talking now for most of us that don't have it necessarily in that extreme, but still have, how many masks do you have, for example? There's the mask you wear when you're at your office. There's a mask you wear with certain friends. There's another mask you wear. And I don't mean a mask that you conceal everything, but we all have the faces we wear, the different faces we put on for different scenarios. And there's no question, you could see it immediately. No matter how old you are, you can be 80 years old. And usually your parents may be not around anymore, but let's say 60 years old. And you walk in and your mother is there, or your father is there, guaranteed, without even knowing, someone who's an observer will know that your face will change. There'll be a demeanor change. It may be a good change, a certain comfortable change, or you may tighten up, which will never happen with someone that's a stranger. Because parents have that effect on us. We are our parents' children. Again, for good and for bad. Because these things are so embedded within our beings that it's beyond our control even. Even someone that's completely composed, you can't control everything. Certain things just affect you a certain way. So going back to the point here is recognizing that no matter what happens, the inner voice you have is there. It's intact. Even if it never seen the light of day, it's intact. And the challenge is to let it emerge. As I said before, life experiences, so often the voice we have. Let's take politics, for example. I've dealt with this a number of times. It's a little safer to talk about than some other. Well, it's actually not so safe in New York. I remember I wrote an article. It was when President Bush, George W., was elected the second time. So I wrote some article praising him in some way. I don't know. I said something positive about him. Being I have a pretty big mailing list, and many people are New Yorkers, you can't imagine how much hate mail I got. First time ever. I've written about all kinds of controversial topics. Suddenly, I wrote something positive. It wasn't even like, I didn't worship him or something. It was some statement. But New York Jewish Democrats just couldn't handle it. And hate mail. That wasn't, I can't say hate, but there was a lot of, one woman wrote to me, you've destroyed, you've changed my life in such many ways, and now you write such a thing, it's like, I feel it's like a major betrayal of my trust and so on. And I wrote back to her, I said, let me ask you something. Let's see if we even disagree. And let's say I'm even wrong. Why is this such a betrayal of trust? I mean, if for 15 years you've been coming to my classes and you've read my books and it's helped you, why so all that's erased because I wrote a positive thing about someone you hate? It sounds a little weird. But I realized that these things are so deeply embedded. So actually this woman who wrote to me, came back to so I wrote to her in a nice way, so she calmed down. And then I invited her for Shabbos, and I said to her, can we have a conversation about this, or is this completely off limits? Anyway, we had a conversation. A very intelligent woman. She's actually a professor, etc., etc. And in our conversation, I was really just intrigued by the phenomenon. That, you said such a thing. Now, if I said something like, kill all blacks or something, or, some Nazi statement, I could understand that I've been exposed by saying something really racist, But it wasn't anything close to that. So in having this conversation, something very interesting happened. I came to discover that she doesn't even believe in the democratic principles. This was her father brainwashing her. And she's whole life, she's spouting all kinds of lines, an intelligent woman in every other area, but this area, because her father was this liberal, basically like, one of these anti-American types, that everything is a conspiracy and so on and so forth. I mean, like a little like Noam Chomsky planet, if you're familiar with Noam Chomsky. And it's not even her opinion. So I said, so you're I wasn't even insulted. It was like interesting. I said, so you were about to completely write me off. If you want to do that, you're right. Because of your father's voice, it has nothing to do with your voice even. That's how extreme it was. So when it comes to political positions, it's actually a good test. Where do your political positions come from? I know most of us like to say, I studied all the schools of thought, and I heard all the opinions, and I came to a conclusion. I can assure you it's usually not that black and white. It's probably opinions that you heard when you were younger. I'm not saying that doesn't mean that we don't have objectivity and we can't challenge, but a lot of political positions, most people have those positions long before they researched all the sides, all the voices. And I say for myself too, I have certain leanings that later when I'm challenged, I start thinking, 1 second, why do I lean this way? Why am I so predisposed to this position? Why am I so, and don't like that position? And often it is. And again, it doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means, just like the guy who says, just because I'm paranoid doesn't mean that no one wants to get me. Just because I'm influenced by my parents doesn't mean I'm wrong. But I mean to say, but if you're an honest person, you have to look at all the positions. Anyway, just an aside I wanted to just mention. Sometimes political affiliations are based on that. And interestingly, sometimes it goes the other way around. Anything your parents did, you decide to do the opposite. So that's also influence. It's just running the other direction. So we're all influenced. Going back, so how do you find that voice? You have to look at your life. And interestingly, even a child growing up in a home of the more nightmarish type of scenario, that too is part of your trajectory. So in many ways, that may be part of your mission, to free yourself from that and teach others not to be influenced by abusive environments. Interesting, right? So suddenly you can turn around even a thing that did so much I don't say damage, but left so many scars and wounds can end up becoming your mission in life. And I know people who did grow up in homes like that, and they use their experience to actually help bring a lot of healing, because they have a credibility and an experience and a knowledge base that someone that didn't grow up in such an environment would never know. So it's interesting how when you take control of your life, is when you start saying, you know what, forget about what others said. Okay, with my parents, this one, that one. Let me figure out what my life is like. And the pop helps you simply start thinking about it a little objectively. Okay, I have a personality. I have a creative personality. I have this type of personality. Now, sometimes you may need help because sometimes we don't even know. We're not sure. Now, I know someone who became a mathematician, and the truth is, he's the farthest thing from a mathematician. His mother decided he has to be a mathematician. Like, some mothers decide the children have to be doctors and lawyers, and that's it. And though he's a decent mathematician, but it's not where his heart is. His heart is a much more artistic type and so on. He uses math, but he never had the confidence because this is what was told to him. And again, that doesn't mean that it's not a decent position. It could be a very respectful, but finding your own so-called inclination is a very powerful epiphany. I was reading somewhere, I forgot the name of the firm. There's an advertising firm in L.A., based in L.A. They're very popular. They were popular, like very expensive, but they really do the job. They brought products to market in very fascinating campaigns that really affect people in a very deep way. And I read that one of their methods of how they creatively come up with campaigns and marketing campaigns and advertising campaigns is they take, once they have a client, and they study and they find out everything about the product and the company or whatever, they take their entire team, the team designated to this client, they take them to an amusement park which they rent out somewhere in Nevada or, I don't know, somewhere deeper in California. An amusement park, a children's amusement park with sand lots and swings and then, slides. I don't even remember what else goes on in a park. Sprinklers, what do they go? Seesaws? No, roller coasters is already sophisticated. I'm talking about the basic park, the basics. Huh? Right, stuff like that. And they have them break into groups where they just go back to their childhood and just play in this park for hours. And then they come together after 3-4 hours where they go into this mode of back to their childhood type of mode, and they sit down and they brainstorm. And the ideas they come up with is completely wild and mind-boggling, because what they do is take them completely out of their comfort zone, the team. They're not sitting in executive offices with the bay windows looking out at the whole Pacific Ocean and all the other things that adults like to brag about, or in some bar or in something. They take them into a real, raw, primal place. Now, it's not, you think about it, I'm sure they're not the only ones that do it. Because when you're suddenly in that environment, you start becoming yourself more, as opposed to what people expect of you. And you think out of the box, literally, because you're taken out of the box. And they come up with these tremendous creative ideas. I just read about them. That's not relevant which company it is. I just was pointing out as an example. And the truth is, when I read it, it resonated so much because in the Talmud you have examples of these type of exercises. I'll just give you an example. Rabbi Zera was a great sage, and he was a master of what's called the Babylonian Talmud. Now you may know there's also Jerusalemite Talmud. And they're very different, but they were composed of two academies. There was an academy in Jerusalem, and there was an academy in Babylon, in modern day Iraq, Iran. That was established after the destruction of the first temple by the Babylonians, by Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, so now Rabbi Zera, after mastering the Babylonian Talmud, decided that he wants to now begin studying and mastering the Jerusalem Talmud, which is a very different approach, a different methodology. So what did he do? The Talmud says something very strange. He fasted 100 fasts. He did not eat for 100 days. Not in a row, obviously, but for 100 days, deprived himself, so he should forget the Babylonian Talmud to study the Jerusalem Talmud. So, of course, the obvious question is, what's going on? First of all, since when is knowledge have to be forgotten to assume new knowledge? Knowledge is accumulative. Whatever you learn, tomorrow you learn more. Why do you have to forget? Secondly, according to the Torah, you're not allowed to intentionally forget divine wisdom, the Torah. And what's going on? And the answer given is, he didn't go to forget the knowledge. He forgot the methodology. He needed to get out of his comfort zone. Because the Babylonian methodology is very much through questions, debates, argument. You stretch an idea from one extreme to the next till you get crystallized. The Jerusalem Talmud is very different. It's very intuitive. It's like, what's your intuition? You try to get to the conclusion immediately. It's not through a whole heart-wrenching and wrangling process. That methodology was different than his methodology worked for him. He had to get out of his comfort zone. The fasting was like that advertising agency going to a different environment. And then that environment, you suddenly are forced to think differently. That's what he did. And you'll find many examples of this. Lech lecha ma'atzecha melatecha beis avicha, Abraham leaving comfort zones. Because a comfort zone, as much as it indicates comfort, it also is most of our undoing. Because in comfort zones you do not grow. You perpetuate your old story. Or as they say in the world of healing, if nothing changes, nothing changes. Or I like to put it this way, that if you think what you thought, and you say what you said, and you did what you did, and you say what you said, and you do what you did, what are you going to have? What you had. It's a mathematical certainty. Because if you think what you thought yesterday, and you say what you said yesterday, and you do what you did yesterday, what kind of result are you expecting? What do they say? Insanity is doing the same thing, expecting different results. But we're constantly doing that, because we hold on for our dear lives to comfort zones. So though there's a time to be comfortable, but it's never is it a catalyst for growth. Maybe it's a time to gather your thoughts, a time to just kick off your shoes and be a little comfortable. But comfort zones are not conducive to growth, because comfort zones basically continue and perpetuate that which you had. So it's not going to give you new energy. New energy comes from tension, from something different. And especially, this is true, by the way, even if your comfort zone is a healthy one. You stay in your home, you stay in your environment. But imagine the comfort zone is not such a healthy one because it's just what you're used to, then for sure, it's actually a destructive force. So the way to find your voice is you have to get out of your comfort zone, which of course itself is a terrifying prospect, but that's the key. Because whatever is the past is going to haunt you. The first step of getting out of your comfort zone is not necessarily, we're not talking about cold turkey, you have to drop your whole past. That doesn't work usually. It's step by step. Ma'at agarshena is an expression. Tafasta meruba le tafasta. You don't bite off more than you can chew. It's a step-by-step process. And guided well, and with a good strategy, you slowly, it's like weaning yourself off of something. You don't have to do it extreme. Slow, step by step. You replace something with something else. Because deprivation is very, very difficult. So the way is not just suddenly to stop everything. It's finding step by step. But we all know how difficult it is to break a habit, to change a habit, because habits are become ingrained. So it's all part of that process. So finding your voice is a price to pay, my friends. That I cannot tell you there is no price to pay. But the price is well worth it. The price is essentially to give up your little comfort zones, to give up those security blankets that you've become so accustomed to that you hold on to. Not to give them all up, but to slowly learn to free yourself from them. Because if you don't, your voice will not be freed. Then your voice will just be a product of your past. It really comes down to that. So what are ways to do this? Number one is, as I said, slowly, with a good mentor, with a good friend, and also with like doing it with another person, like in a way where it's like a joint effort. That way you feel the support. Very hard to go on any journey alone, especially a new journey. But when you have people who validate you, encourage you, tell you, you can do anything you believe in, anything you really set your mind to, you really can do, and I believe in you, I'm ready to help you. That's the people you need to really go on such a journey. And especially if you had voices in your past that have always discouraged you and said, you can't do it, who do you think you are, blah, blah, blah. So you definitely need to have a new set of friends or a new set of support that encourages that. And that's not so difficult to find as you may think. Well, I'll tell you where the difficulty is, that usually we invite, the friends in our lives are the ones that we want to perpetuate our story. So that's part of our comfort zone. If you stay with the friends that you had, you're going to get the same results. So that's why Mishana Mokim, Mishana Mazel means you have to change your location and you change your luck. Now, location doesn't always mean physical location. Sometimes it means that as well. It could also mean your mindset. It could mean your friends. It could mean who you turn to. Now, this is, of course, challenging our entire so-called existing comfort zone. And that is always a not easy thing to do. That's why you need loving and caring and sensitive people, because that helps give you a lending hand, a helping hand, and a shoulder to lean on, sympathetic ear, and all the other metaphors that help you build the strength necessary to make that move. So, to sum up, essentially it's first of all appraising yourself and figuring out where you stand in this regard. And secondly, then doing what's needed to do to make some moves. And it begins right now. You want to make a move, you don't wait tomorrow, it's not in a week from now, it's not, I'll think about it for the next 6 months. You have to begin, because it's always going to be some resistance. I think I mentioned this a number of times. It's just always intriguing. It's a good example, at least, in my opinion. When I was a kid, I remember, so I was a pretty good swimmer, and then came the day I wanted to dive. I don't know, I was 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old, I don't remember, something like that, to dive. So I remember we were in a bungalow colony, decided this summer we learned to dive, fine. Now, as I said, I swam well, I was not afraid of water, nothing. I get up on the diving board, I move up, I can't figure out, I just can't bring myself to dive. Okay, you start the process, count to 10. One day, the next day I count to 10, you keep counting to 10, nothing's happening. Now this was a whole summer, mind you. Then I say, no, not from the diving board, I'll dive in from the edge of the pool, a little lower. I really just had this block that just froze as soon as I was ready to do it. I just could not do it. I asked some people who were diving, can you tell me some tricks? They say, you just jump in and that's it. And, no, there's no tricks to the trade. And I was thinking, what's the fear? Ridiculous. I could go in the water, swim in the water for a long period of time. What am I afraid of? As children, you think like your stomach will burst open. What do they call a stomach flop, whatever it's called. And you think your stomach will burst open. I don't think I had that fear. For the life of me, I couldn't figure out what's stopping me. Anyway, that summer ended. The next summer, so a friend of mine had some Rahmana, some pity on me. So I decided a new trick. Instead of jumping in, I'm going to sit at the edge of the pool and I'll just, drop in, and then we'll do it slowly. And then I'll jump in next. I'm sitting, I had this, I remember it's a childish, we all have mishigas and some phobia, I don't know what it was. Anyway, I was sitting there and and then finally, without knowing, guy comes and just pushes me in. I was doing like this and he kicked me in right at the right time and I went in and I survived. And from then on, I became a pretty good diver. I learned different types of dives. That was that. Okay. And I always thought to myself, what is this thing? So here's my little theory. And I don't know if it's true or not, but it's a theory. I thought to myself, okay, the thing was like this. Actually, I got the idea from a tightrope walker. There was a story with a tightrope walker where someone asked, he said, what's the secret to tightrope walking? Most people think it's balance, right? You're walking on a very small, and you have to learn how to balance this and not be afraid and not tremble, etc. And the tightrope walker explained, no, that's not the secret. That's part of it. The real secret is focus. You have to focus on a target on the other side of the tightrope and just keep walking a straight line toward it. Listen to this. So therefore, when is the most difficult point in tightrope walking? You'd think is right in the middle, where you're not, there's no beginning, there's nowhere to go, only down. Or it says, no, the most difficult time is when you have to make a turn at the edge. Because not the fear of falling, is because when you have to make a turn, you have to find a new target. Because now the target that you had has to now be the other side. And that's the hardest moment, because you lose for a moment you're like a hub, your focal point. So that gave me that thought that, I was comfortable in the water because I know how to swim. I was comfortable on the ground. We all know how to stand on the ground. But that split second, where you're not on the ground and not in the water, is in some unconscious way terrifying, because that suspension, you're not here, you're not there. That's my thought. That many of us have that fear. We have no problem being where I am. I have no problem even ended up here. But then there's the unknown, the void in between. That I don't have the security of the ground and I have the security of the water. That's the moment that we have the deep fears. And in relationships, this is plays itself out. No problem being alone. No problem. Everyone can understand, finding someone you love and you trust and so on. But how do you get to that point when you don't trust them yet? There's always that unknown space where you're getting used to something new, and you're no longer the old, but the new hasn't taken hold either. There's an unknown, because maybe the person that you think you trust is not really trustworthy. There's the doubt. And that is where we get frozen, many of us. So now, in a healthy environment, you have voices and support that says, no, don't be afraid. Take the leap. We're there for you. We're behind you. When you have voices that tell you you're worthless, or your choices don't make sense, or you're who do you think you are, obviously it just undermines any confidence we may have. So the challenge is not only to get out of our comfort zone, but to have the courage and the right people around us that support and say, you could do it. It is an unknown, no question. There's certain new things going to happen, but that's how new things happen. That's how it is. Anything new requires something new. You can't assume a new layer of skin if you're not going to shed the old layer. However, you don't have to do it overnight. You do it slow steps, small steps, small steps. Small steps, and then suddenly there's a paradigm shift after an accumulation of many small steps. So it's a process of self-awareness and going back to finding that voice. What is that voice? Discovering yourself, your personality, and the other three things: opportunities, people, places. And then, of course, building a support net of people and others that help you get through the unknown stage. And knowing, and of course, having that absolute confidence that your birthright, that you have a voice inside of you and a song inside of you, is critical. Because if you don't really firmly believe that, then the comfort zone is always going to win out. Because you'll say, you know what, I know for sure I'm comfortable. I don't know for sure if I can do it. So tell me, who's going to win that debate? But if you know for sure you could do it, and you know for sure that God gave you a soul, and that soul has the capacity to do anything it sets its mind to, and you have people that support that, that can counter the comfort of a comfort zone. If you don't have that certainty, it becomes more difficult. Then sometimes we make a move because of desperation. Just got to get out of a burning building. But it's not going to come necessarily from a positive. It'll come from fear or desperation or just running from something destructive. But why do we have to wait to hit the rock bottom? So the way to do it is to find that ability to have that confidence and know that you absolutely have that voice. Unfortunately, we live in a world where we don't have many people who affirm that. Think about who you know today. How many people that you know, that you met today, people that are on your daily routine schedule, affirm that you are indispensable? It's not a world in which you live in. People affirm your value because you give some value that you give to them. So it's like a give and take. You do this for me, I'll do this for you. Very few people affirm our value just because we are. That's a rare, that's why we need to find people like that, because that's this type of confidence and this security that I'm talking about here. So Balescha Saneres, the chapter tells us, raise the flames until, light the flame, raise them until they rise on their own, because each of us has a flame that can rise on its own. It needs someone to ignite. It needs someone to educate, someone to inspire. But it's not just, but that person that inspires is not creating you. They're just getting you going. And then you can rise on your own. And you have the absolute ability to do something that no one that ever lived and no one that ever will live can do but you. I mean, that's a tremendous statement. And we're told absolutely that's the case. So you need people who actually believe that and don't just mouth it as a slogan, and people who support, and of course your own belief in that. When you study Torah, you study Chassidus especially, about the soul, about your own soul, that's essentially what it constantly reinforces, that your soul has that capacity. Your body may not have. The material world, as I said earlier, is impermanent, and as such is weak, is mercurial, ever-changing, and so on. But your soul is not. A soul lives on forever, and a soul does not age. It only gets stronger with time, because it doesn't thrive on material forces. It thrives on experience, on wisdom, on love, things that don't wane, and that's something each of us have inside of us. So God bless you all in lighting your flame, Balescha, in a way to rise on your own. I've made it my mission to help people find their mission, and of course find my mission in the process as well, and to help people find that flame that they can rise on their own. There's no greater tribute than when someone tells you that you haven't given me anything, but you made me feel that I can do anything I want to do. Because it's not about giving, it's not about like the credit that you gave someone something. It's rather helping them understand that they have it already inside of them and it was always there. Like one of the best compliments I ever got was a few years ago, Rosh Hashanah. I got a note from a woman. She was living in Seattle. She had moved that year. She wrote from Austin, Texas to Seattle. That year was a miserable year, a very ugly divorce. Her life fell apart. And she said, one of the rays of hope that I had every week was your email. Even when all else failed, your email Thursday night, Friday was like my lifesaver. She writes to me. Okay, but that was not the main punchline. Then she concludes and says, it was right before Rosh Hashanah, I remember, because it was like a Happy New Year. She says that, I'm a sculptor by trade, by profession, and Michelangelo was once asked, how do you carve those beautiful angels in the marble? And he said, I see the angels trapped in the marble, and I carved and set them free. And then she writes to me, so thank you for setting my angel free. I found that to be beautiful because it's exactly the truth. You can't give anybody anything. You can give them you can carve away the impediments and the blockages and the doubts that don't let them find their own angel within, or the flower within, or the music within, all the analogies I gave before. That's what you can do. And that's a great gift to be able to do that. But at the end of the day, what you're simply doing is helping a person find themselves, find their voice, and have the courage to embrace it, and find the right people that will celebrate with them, not those that are threatened or exposes their own lack of security because they see someone else that's secure. So I bless you all to be able to find that to carve. We can carve together. Sometimes it's marble, sometimes it's concrete, sometimes it's other substances which I won't mention. But bottom line is you carve and carve, and your angel emerges. I think it's a beautiful way of looking at things. So I say to all of you here, and anyone listening, it's an honor to be able to commune with fellow angels and flowers and music. And hopefully we can all uncover that beauty inside each of us and all those around us, and imagine what kind of world that would be like. So thank you, and until next Wednesday, where we continue this journey, as we've been doing for over 3 decades now. Yeah, it's a long time, but who's counting? And if you have not given us your email, please send us your email address here or wherever you may be. In any other way we can help you uncover your angel, your flower, please let us know. Philip, my good friend, singer-songwriter, gives his class Thursday night. If anybody's interested, please call our office. And with that, everyone have a very pleasant week. Thank you very much. Sure.